Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Persistence Payoff Show. We're here on USA Global TV and Radio. I'm your host, Kimberly Schaefer. In addition to hosting the show, I am a first-time entrepreneur and inventor. I invented the Ring Thing, which is a waterproof ring holder, and I'm very much enjoying this new journey. I'm learning every day and loving it. So this show is focused on persistence and the quality of persistence and the payoffs that it brings to us, both personally and professionally. One of the things I'm learning is that we can gain this quality in different ways. Some of us learn it through time, through our experience, and others of us are just born with it, and it's hardwired into us to have that quality of persistence. And I'm really interested in talking to people and learning about their hows and whys. It's a fascinating discussion topic. Which brings me to our guest today. I am honored and thrilled to have Ken Grossman, the founder of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company today. Ken founded the brewery in 1980, and he literally built it by hand, every component. And now it's one of the largest independent breweries in the United States. It's 100% family owned and operated. And it also, in addition to creating this very successful business, Ken inspired many brewers to follow their own dreams and establish their own breweries. So I'm very much looking forward to talking to him, and welcome, Ken.
Very much. Glad to be here.
All right. Thank you. I grew up in Chico. I went to Chico High and Butte College and Chico State. So it's always been a real point of pride for me that the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company is from Chico. And I get that little tingle of pride every time I see it in a store or in a restaurant. So I'm delighted to have you here and talk about your journey with it. You wrote a book that's really fascinating called Beyond the Pale that talks about your life story and also your journey in setting up the brewery. And what I'd like to do is just pull out some of the key points from that book and talk about it, particularly with the angle of persistence and the role that persistence played at that time. If we can, I'd like to start by just asking you to first give us a snapshot of where the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company is now in terms of facilities and production.
Sure. We started in a very small little metal 3,000 square foot warehouse building. And we were there for our first 8 years or so. And then I was able to move the brewery to 20th Street in Chico, so still the south part of our community. In 1988, we built at the time, we thought state-of-the-art new small brewery, about 25,000 square foot facility. And we've been able to stay and grow in this location. We currently now have, I don't know, probably close to 35 acres and over 350,000 square feet of buildings. And then about 10 years ago, we decided that we really needed to look at a East Coast location, shipping beer from California to North Carolina or to the East Coast didn't really make sense. So we did find a site in North Carolina and built a second facility there starting in 2012. So we operate on both coasts currently.
All right. That's great. And that will be very impressive to keep in mind as we talk about the very beginnings and everything you did to literally build it by hand. It's amazing what you built. When I was reading the book, I was struck by a few things, especially from your childhood. And it seems like you've always had this quality of focus and persistence. And a couple of examples were when you were 14, you applied for and got a city permit to build a structure in your backyard, and you built that by hand yourself. Yep. And then when you were in junior high, you wanted to get a job. And so you literally knocked on every door possible until someone hired you. And I'm curious to know, where did that focus and persistence come from? Was that modeled for you growing up, or was that just part of your nature?
A little combination, I think, of probably both. So I did live in a small area at the time in the outskirts of Southern California, outside of Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley. It was a growing area and it's continued to grow, and it's now part of the city. But my neighborhood had both some inventors, scientists, academics. My next door neighbor was a principal and later became one of the heads in the LA city school system. And another few doors down was another neighbor who was a metallurgist, a cyclist, avid winemaker, beer maker, was sort of into all sorts of creativity, doing things with his own hands. And so I think both of those neighborhood people were inspirations for me. My grandfather was a judge and was a very driven person as well. So I sort of grew up with a lot of influences. My father was an attorney. My parents did get divorced when I was fairly young, so he played less of an influence probably in my inspiration for doing things myself.
Yeah. And then when you first started doing home brewing, the summer between junior and senior high school, I believe you set up your own home brew kit and started home brewing. And I'm curious to know, so that was a hobby at the time. And was that something that you did just because it was fun, or did you have a particular draw towards brewing and the idea of it?
Well, as I mentioned, my neighbor lived a few doors down. He was a very avid and accomplished home brewer for the era. He cultured his own yeast and did his own mashing and malting. And so he sort of planted the seed a little bit, just me watching what he was doing. And he'd always have 5-gallon jugs bubbling away in the hallway. And so I was a bit fascinated. I did enjoy science at a young age, though. So I was interested and did, I guess, enjoyed the whole world of science. So I think that was planted in me pretty early, and maybe the fermentation and the doing things yourself also helped in that regard. But yeah, I decided I wanted to make a little bit of beer, and first made a little bit of wine, actually. So I made some not very good wine, and then started to make small batches of beer.
I can see how that would really be interesting. If you're interested in science, the whole fermentation and how am I going to make this happen, that would be pretty interesting. And so you then, as a young man, moved to Chico and you got married and started your family, and you were working in bike shops and managing a bike shop. And you also had a home brew shop that I believe is still in existence under the direction of someone else. That's pretty amazing. But there was a decision point where you had that all set up and you were doing those jobs, but you also had this dream of establishing a brewery. And so how did you decide to just go full force and really put everything into establishing the brewery?
Yes, I moved to Chico in 1972. I was 17 years old and wanted to leave Southern California, get out of the big city as it was becoming. And I had a attraction for Northern California. I spent quite a bit of time backpacking and hiking in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I had some friends attending Chico State, and I made the trip up here. I liked the community. I went and knocked on doors. I'd been working in a bike shop in Southern California, so I had bicycle repair experience. And I got a job at a bike shop and decided to move to Chico. Initially, without the intent of going back to school immediately. I figured I'd take a break. But within a few months, I went to Butte College, started studying chemistry, which, again, fascinated me, and continued to homebrew. And I had another neighbor who suggested I open a homebrew supply store, and I thought that seemed like a good idea, so I could get better ingredients for my homebrewing hobby. So that happened in 1976, and ran the homebrew shop for a couple of years, and decided that brewing was a fascinating hobby, but it could also be an income stream and my livelihood. So I sold the homebrew shop, wrote a business plan. I had a partner at the time, and then tried to borrow money, which we were unsuccessful at. And then in 1978, we just started to build equipment ourselves and cobble a small brewery together with support from family and friends as far as loaning us some money. And we opened the initial brewery, made our first batch of beer November 15th, 1980. And we spent about $100,000 finally to get the doors open, which was about double what I had originally told my friends and investors it would take, but that's what it took us to get the doors open.
Yeah. Well, in the book, you describe your journey of finding salvage parts to put together yourself to literally build every aspect of the brewery, and your hand was in every single piece of equipment and process in the brewing. How did your persistence ever waver during that time? Did you ever think, oh man, what have I got myself into? And how did you push through it?
Yeah, numerous times I had that thought. I mean, we didn't have much money. I was still working at a bike shop to pay the bills and to feed my family. I had gone to Butte College to study chemistry, and then later I transferred to Chico State. But I decided when I was going to open a brewery, the only way we could really do it with such limited resources was to do it all ourselves. So I re-enrolled back at Butte College, and I took every welding and fabrication course I could get into. I took some business classes. I took refrigeration repair. I took electrical wiring class. So I decided I needed to get the skills to do it, and just started doing it. And we kept running out of money, and that was a real challenge. We were not really able to make an income until we made our first batch of beer. And even then we had some problems with our first few batches, so we decided not to sell any of our initial beer. So there was a lot of times where it was quite a struggle to keep the motivation going and keep sort of plowing forward. But at that point in time, I really committed every penny that I had, and my father, my grandfather, and some friends had invested money. So not completing the project and not making a positive business out of it was not an option. I really had to make it work. I really just committed all my resources, and failure was not an option. So I think that was in part what kept me going. I just didn't have another alternative. I couldn't walk away from it at any point until I really completed the whole mission.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like between building everything yourself and taking classes, and working at the bike shop part-time, you were having some pretty long days.
Yeah. 7 days a week was pretty much standard, and 10 or 12-hour days were the norm.
And had you anticipated that when you started?
I don't know what I anticipated when I started. I was pretty naive. I mean, I didn't know anything about the commercial brewing industry. I'd never worked at a brewery. I just had made small batches at home, and went and visited a number of smaller breweries. So I went and saw the Anchor Brewery in San Francisco and met Fritz Maytag, and he was a bit of a mentor for me in the early years. I went and visited the very first startup craft brewery in America called New Albion, which was in Northern California, and saw what he had done, and saw his struggles and saw how difficult it was. So I think I got reality pretty quick that it was not going to be easy. And again, the brewing industry at that point, there were less than 50 breweries in America total. Today we've got about 10,000. So the landscape has changed dramatically since I started. But out of the 50 or so, that included the largest Anheuser-Busch and Miller and Coors and Olympia and the other brewers that were around at the time. And then a handful of small brewers, less than 30 small breweries in the United States. And I did get to meet a number of them at some conferences that I went to, and realized that the brewing industry in general was very competitive and very difficult. So I think I didn't know what I didn't know in the beginning, and I quickly learned that it was going to be a pretty tough challenge to grow the business. But we just persevered and kept selling a few more cases every week until we continued to be able to expand and finally got enough cash flow where we could sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that also struck me in reading the book was your dedication to quality. Like there was a point where you could have gone on and just try to push out as much quantity as you could and see how big you could get as fast as you could, but you were very focused on ensuring quality, and it wasn't just pushing out beer. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Between 1978 and 1982, so sort of the beginning of the whole craft brewing industry, there were 6 small brewers in America, 6 new start small brewers. We were one of the 6. And I, again, knew my peers, and there were so few of us, we did communicate pretty regularly. And everybody was challenged to some degree. Nobody had any money, but some of the brewers weren't making the best beer, and they quickly went out of business. And so from the very beginning, we saw that in order to survive and to compete, we really had to have great beer. And so we focused on quality control and consistency from the beginning. We had a real laboratory to start. We didn't have a lot of equipment in it, but we knew that keeping our eye on quality control checks and the health of our yeast and looking out for any wild yeast or bacteria and things that would impact the flavor of the beer was really critical. So we did focus quite a bit on quality and consistency from day one, and I think that's part of the reason that we're here today. And those other 5 brewers have gone out of business since then. So we're the last of that original 6 still standing.
Wow, that's congratulations. That's a great accomplishment. And the pale ale is one of your signature brews. Is the recipe for that pretty much the same, or have you changed that over time?
The recipe is the same. We have changed varieties of barley and things like that just because the industry has changed varieties, but we still use Cascade hops, the hop that we helped popularize and use in our pale ale. So no, the recipe is pretty much the same as it was in the very beginning. We still naturally condition the beer in the bottle and in the can, something that we've done from the very beginning because we had to. We didn't have the resources to have ways to carbonate artificially, so we naturally carbonated the pale ale, and it's still carbonated that way today.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I believe that you don't pasteurize. Is that still the case?
We do not pasteurize most of our beers. We fairly recently came out with a non-alcoholic beer, and it needs to be pasteurized just because of the lack of alcohol. You lose some of the inherent protection that alcohol gives to prevent pathogenic growth. Beer in itself, normal beer with alcohol, does not support pathogenic growth. So it's not like milk or eggs or other products that are susceptible to having pathogens growing in beer. Is a safe product, and that's why it's been around for so many thousands of years, because it was safe to drink when water wasn't safe to drink.
That's it. That makes sense. People could carry it on ships and do all kinds of things with it. And there's one quote I wanted to read from the book that really struck me because you were a trailblazer in setting up the brewery, but then also within the brewing industry, you were a trailblazer in terms of not pasteurizing and some of the ways that you did things. And you mentioned that you had this realization back in the 2nd grade, and you said, even at that young age, I recognized there was a price to be paid for nonconformity. Staying true to who I was set me on a path outside the norm. And for me, when I read that, I thought that's an incredible realization at any age, much less that young. And it feels to me like that has been true consistently through your life. And I'm curious to know, did you ever have times when you wavered and thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't just be on my own path? Or were you always comfortable being who you are?
Well, early on, that quote came because my mom would tell stories of being on a first name basis with the school principals. When I was growing up, I was regularly getting into trouble and pushing people's buttons. But I think doing running your own business to begin with is sort of non-conforming. I mean, you have to do a lot of things and take risks, and a lot of people aren't comfortable in that role. I had worked at a number of bicycle shops, both in Southern California and in Chico, and had a number of bosses, and I learned what I did and didn't want to have for my work experience and life experience. And I think I came to the realization that I really had to be my own boss at a pretty early age in order to be satisfied. So I think part of what drove me into the brewing industry was really doing my own thing. The alchemy of making beer was fascinating, and it still fascinates me today. Being able to put these raw materials together with a life form, yeast, and create a wonderful beverage at the end was something that I really got satisfaction out of. I love to cook, and brewing is a form of expression, just like cooking is. Putting the ingredients together in the right combination to come out with a product that you want to eat or want to enjoy. So I think a lot of things probably sort of steered me in the direction I went.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you were first establishing the brewery and finding these salvage parts to put back together and create your own, can you talk a little bit about how your persistence showed up in terms of the places that you went? I mean, you went not just locally, but you went in California, the Pacific Northwest, you went to Germany to find the parts. And can you talk about that process a little bit, please?
Sure. The dairy industry was one that seemed like it would be a very appropriate industry to borrow from as far as just equipment and technology. Dairies have very high hygiene standards. There were a lot of small dairies around Northern California, up into Oregon and Washington, and so that was a source of equipment for us that I identified pretty early on. I had a 1-ton Chevy flatbed truck that I would drive up and down the Sacramento Valley and up into Northern California, up into Oregon and Washington as well, and explore little towns that had historical dairy industries. I realized I could go into a feed store in a small community and ask them if they knew of any local dairies around, because they had been supplying feed in the past. And I found a bunch of shuttered dairies and was able to buy pumps and pipes and all sorts of things at just a few cents on the dollar. And a lot of that could be repurposed into making beer. So that was really the source of my early equipment. I had a junkyard down in Keys, California, that specialized in food processing equipment. And so I would go down there and buy used fittings and pipe and whatnot. And one of the first pieces of equipment I bought was a small lathe, and it allowed me to chop the ends off a pipe and repurpose the fittings, so I didn't have to buy new stainless steel parts. So I saved a lot of money, learned how to weld. So all the early stainless steel welding I did, and basically just cobbled this original brew together. And thankfully, I've been able to repurchase at least the brew house from a brewery that I sold it to over 20 years ago, and we have it here in Chico, sort of as a museum piece.
Oh, I'm glad you were able to get it back.
Yep.
Yeah, that is a very neat piece of history to have. And so it sounds like at the time, that you mentioned that there were other small breweries and you could go and visit them and talk to other people and learn. Is that culture still in place in the craft brewery industry? Do people come to you who are establishing breweries and ask for advice?
Yeah, I mean, the brewing industry, at least the small brewing industry, and even the large brewing industry for that matter, has been pretty supportive of each other. I mean, I could go to Anheuser-Busch or Miller or Coors back in the early years and ask for advice, and they would be very, very generous with helping us out. So Fritz Maytag, as I mentioned, at the Anchor Brewery, he was really the sort of the grandfather of high-end American small batch beers. He really started out, he bought a defunct brewery or a failing brewery with the Anchor Brewery, but he put money into it and learned how to be a good brewer and updated the equipment and really turned that business around. And so he was pretty generous with his with his help, as I mentioned, the big brewers were as well. We actually bought malt from Coors Brewing Company back when there was a shortage in the late 70s, early 80s. We were just getting started. So the industry is still somewhat that way. I wouldn't say quite to the same degree. It's more competitive now, and most of the big American breweries are foreign owned now, and so the dynamics a little bit different than it used to be. But I would say overall we still help each other out, and there's a lot of camaraderie in this industry.
Yeah, that's a great. I live in San Diego, and for a while at least, San Diego was saying that it was the craft brewery capital of the world. I don't know if that was actually true or not, but there were a lot of them, and I have noticed some of them are still here and some are not. So
yeah, it's our industry right now is pretty challenged. Beer in general has not been growing the last several years, and craft beer in particular has had worse trends than the industry in general. So there's a lot of pressures on us from raw material, supply, pricing, and it's very competitive on the shelf. It's hard to get, shelf space, hard to get into grocery stores and markets, get a real presence. So it's a daily fight to try to grow your business in this current market.
Yeah, I can imagine. It sounds like in a way you came in at a sense of more camaraderie and people. You hear about somebody sharing a recipe with another person, but they leave out that one key ingredient so that one person can never make their recipe. Yeah. And I'm sure that people weren't totally revealing about things, but it sounds like it was more of a supportive environment than trying to undermine each other at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to people from other industries, printing companies and whatever smaller industries or big industries, and they say they've never seen the kind of camaraderie at the brewing industry shows for each other. Now, the sales guys on the street may not be as friendly, but normally the production people, we love to talk about beer and brewing and techniques, and so normally there's a share of the science of brewing, not necessarily in the marketing or sales side, though.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is Sierra Nevada still coming up with new brews, or are you
all the time?
Company expanding in terms of?
Yeah, that's one of the areas I do stay involved with is new product development. We've got a team of innovation brewers, as they're called, and they're constantly working on new recipes, new types of beer, new types of not beer products as well. So we're exploring and expanding what we produce, and we'll continue to do that. Innovation's sort of at the heart of our industry, or the craft brewing industry, certainly pushing boundaries, making new styles, adapting old styles, and putting your own spin on them. So yeah, producing new and different products is something we'll always be doing.
Well, and it's pretty amazing that the company is 100% family owned and operated. Are there any other of the large breweries that are the same?
The large breweries, no. I guess the one example would be Yuengling, which is still a family-owned brewery in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. So they're the largest that still have family ownership and control, although they are partnered with Coors in some regards at this point. But I think they're still basically an independent brewery. But all the other big companies are pretty much now international companies.
I'd be interested to know what the process has been for you to turn over the reins of some aspects of the company to your family. Has it been hard to let that go, or what has that been like for you?
I mean, it's something I desired to at least take a more time for myself, going back 10 years or so anyway. I wasn't super successful. I said we built a second facility in North Carolina, and I was actively involved in that project, both on the design side and then on the construction and commissioning side. I spent a lot of time out in North Carolina getting that brewery up and running. My son moved out there in 2012, and so he's part of the leadership team out there. And then I have one of my two daughters is working here in Chico with me. So I've wanted to take some more time. It's been hard to let go, though. I mean, having designed and built a lot of the processes and equipment, I've got an intimate knowledge of a lot of things, and so I'm trying to hand those off and make sure we keep the company going in the right direction. I've been involved, but I'm doing my best to let the new team take charge and get us to the next level. So I'm enjoying riding my bike. I'm still working a little bit, but I'm not coming into the office 5 days a week anymore, or 6 days a week anymore. But still have my fingers in a few areas of the business.
Yeah, well, it's a well-deserved time of working a little bit less, but I can also understand like it's your heart. You gave everything to establishing it. So I also think your children are very lucky to have had you as a role model of leadership and innovation and persistence. So I'm sure that that's helped them greatly.
Yeah, I've got the third generation. So my oldest granddaughter just started working part-time in one of our laboratories. So she's the next generation coming up, and she's at this point enjoying her job and interested in the company.
Wow. Interesting. I always feel like there's aspects of us that we are who we are, right? No matter throughout our whole lives. And so I'm curious to know, like you've had such a strong innovation gene, I guess, or, and enjoying building things and putting things together. Do you have new outlets for that now?
I've got more things to do than I could possibly ever do in my lifetime. So I still do a bit of fabrication. I got projects I'm working on right now with a new power plant, new hydroelectric power plant, and I've got plenty to keep me occupied.
Yeah. Well, and also your bike riding, I think, is very impressive. You've been
back riding my bike again. I've been an on and off road cyclist for 50 years, and now getting more into mountain biking and really enjoying that.
Yeah. But from this vantage point now, when you look back over the development of the brewing company, is there one aspect or time that you're really most proud of in terms of persistence?
Well, I bought my partner out a bit over 20 years ago, and that was a long and slightly painful process, but I persisted, and we ended up, I think, hopefully both in a good place at the end of the process. And that then allowed me to really, chart my own destiny completely versus having a 50% partner and my partner's family involved and my family involved. So, ending up with 100% of the ownership of the company was something that was meaningful to get done for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. And you also, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but there's a point in the book where you say, as you were facing some of the obstacles that you ran into, you were just focused on addressing that obstacle. And that if you'd actually looked at the whole picture, you might have given up or not continued, not persisted. But can you talk a little bit about that philosophy of I'm just dealing with what's in front of me right now?
Yeah. I mean, doing what we did back in 1980, I mean, there was really no track record. I mean, today, as I mentioned, there's almost 10,000 breweries. Well, they had a lot of people came before them who struggled and failed, and some succeeded. So I didn't have a lot to look back on. As I mentioned, Fritz Maytag had successfully revamped the Anchor Brewery. And the other few small breweries that I could see what they were doing weren't necessarily running their businesses in a great manner. So there wasn't a lot of role models. And I think if I would have sort of looked at the whole of what I needed to accomplish, from building the equipment to making good beer to selling good beer to making sure I had enough money in the bank to keep the company going. All of those things, if I had faced head on initially, I probably would have realized it was too big of a lift, and I might have done something completely different with my life. But being able to sort of take it one bite at a time and sort of know where I wanted to get to but didn't know all the steps I had to accomplish ahead of time, was maybe a godsend that I didn't have so much to keep me from fulfilling my dream.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. When I was thinking about it, I thought, there's this saying you don't want to miss the forest for the trees, but in a way you were looking at the trees and not the forest, and that did you very well.
Yeah, at the time. Yeah, I mean, it worked for me. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't know what they're getting into before they get into it, but in my case, probably if I would have known everything, I would have been, it would have been too daunting to want to tackle it all at once.
Yeah. Well, and the growth is really interesting. Could you please talk a little bit about, like, with your first business plan, what your production goal was annually compared to where you are now, and how it's grown since then?
Yeah. Again, when I wrote my business plan, I was totally naive, didn't really understand anything about the industry, and didn't really realize the challenges we'd be facing. And so the original business plan called for us making 2,500 barrels of beer a year. A barrel of beer is 31 gallons. My original fermentation cellar, I had 2 300-gallon dairy tanks, and I had 6 aging tanks that I welded myself together, again, 300-gallon tanks. And the business plan called for us hopefully growing up to that 2,500 barrel annual capacity, and then the potential to expand to, I think, 3,500 barrels was all we had envisioned as the sort of the maximum. And that quickly proved to be a pretty faulty business plan from the standpoint of there was not enough cash flow making that little beer to really make ends meet and pay ourselves. And when we started the brewery, I kept working at the bike shop just a couple of days a week in order to pay the bills, because there was no cash flow to even pay ourselves. And so we pretty quickly realized that our business plan had to be completely revamped. I remember being quoted at some point saying if I could only get to 10,000 barrels, and on paper it looked like 10,000 barrels was really a great number from the standpoint of enough cash flow to be able to feed ourselves and to reinvest in the company. And when we left the old facility, we were brewing, I think we brewed almost 13,000 barrels finally. And that involved taking over adjacent warehouse buildings and knocking some walls out and putting tanks outside and doing a whole bunch of things that weren't in the original plan. And then when I designed the 20th Street facility we're at today, we were at less than 15,000 barrels. And I thought, geez, if we could grow to 60,000 barrels, which at the time was bigger than the Anchor Brewery. So I thought that was not going to be anything we'd be able to hit anytime soon, but that was sort of our ultimate plan, was to design to grow to 60,000 barrels. And our first year in the new plant, I think we were over 20,000. Our second year, we were about 30,000. The year after that, we were over 40,000. And so we hit that 60,000 barrel mark within the first 5 years of relocating to the new facility. And I just sort of continued to be opportunistic from a sales standpoint. We were able to add states here and there as we had more beer. And then we finally sort of grew past that 60,000 barrels and started to realize we had a really growing business. We were growing at 30 to 50% annually. And that was a challenge from just how do you manage growth like that? Because we obviously hadn't intended and hadn't designed the plant to really expand to that degree. So I was, for the next, almost continuously for the next 20 years, was trying to figure out how to expand to make more beer and get capital, add capacity. We were brewing all the beer ourselves in Chico at this one site up until we opened North Carolina.
Wow, that's an enormous undertaking. And I believe you were brewing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, we got up to, before we built the new facility, we brewed 363 days 1 year, round the clock, no scheduled downtime. I think we took Christmas and Thanksgiving off that last year. It was a real struggle before we did a pretty major expansion here in Chico. We added a second brew house. We went from a 100-barrel brew house making 3,000 gallons a batch, the equipment I bought used in Germany, to designing and building a brew house that was twice that size, so 6,200-gallon batches, and able to brew 12 batches in a day. And so we went around the clock quite often.
Wow. That's incredible dedication. I mean, really, really inspiring. And we're almost at the end of our time. It's flown by. A question I have is, if someone came to you who was starting their business journey, what advice would you give them regarding persistence as they embark on that journey?
I get asked this question pretty regularly, and I think one of the keys to us succeeding and me succeeding was the sort of the level of commitment. If it's not something you love doing, I think it's going to be hard to commit to doing it 100% day in and day out. So I think finding something you're passionate about. And then there are other people who have different business philosophies. They don't necessarily love what they do, but they get a good paycheck. I mean, for me, it was something that I really cared about, wanted to do, went all in. And so I think just having that level of commitment, that it's going to be harder and there's going to be those really difficult times and challenges. And if you're not 100% invested, the likelihood that you're going to succeed, I think, goes down dramatically.
That makes really good sense, especially when you talk about the long days and long hours that you worked. You have to really be invested in it in every way.
Yep.
All right. Well, this has been so interesting and helpful, and I'm just honored and delighted that you took the time to talk with us. So thank you so much. And I would recommend your book to anyone, whether they're interested in beer or not, because I think it's a fascinating account of following your passion, making it happen, and being dedicated and being persistent about it. So I came away very inspired, and I probably will never brew beer, but it was just a wonderful, wonderful story. So I highly recommend it to anyone.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for reaching out to me.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Gosh, that was fantastic. I'm so honored that he took the time to be here today. I do end every show with a quote about persistence, and I found one that I think ties in really nicely to our discussion today. And this is from President Eisenhower, who said, "For every obstacle, there is a solution. Persistence is the key. The greatest mistake is giving up." And I think that Ken's story of not giving up and persisting in establishing the brewery fits perfectly with this. So I really appreciate that. You can reach Ken at Sierra Nevada Brewing through their website, and you can reach me through the Ring Thing. It's ringthing.com. You can also reach me through Instagram at @ring_thing_. And I'm happy to talk anytime. Thank you so much. And thank you to USA Global TV and Radio, and also to Dr. Jacqueline. Thank you so much.
What if one simple skill could change the way you connect with the world? What if listening could open doors to deeper relationships, stronger businesses, and a better you? Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck, the Listening Mentor, brings you USA Global TV and Radio, a space where voices are heard, ideas are shared, and global communities thrive. Through the elevated listeners' courses and books, you'll master the power of listening, set boundaries with confidence, and transform conversations into opportunities. Join us. Listen, learn, elevate. Whether you're a leader, a coach, a business owner, or someone seeking stronger connections, your journey starts today. Subscribe, learn, and transform today.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honoured to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USA-Global-TV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Music by Johnny Dyes. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative Direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Copyright 2025. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.